The first shell hit the eastern wall at 1400 hours, and Tech third grade Quan Yuan Li felt it in her teeth before she heard it with her ears. The concussion rolled through Hangar Bay 3 like a wave through water, rattling every loose bolt and sending a cascade of corroded ceiling panels tumbling to the ferrocrete floor. She dropped the torque wrench she had been using on a stripped actuator joint and pressed herself flat against the leg of the Centurion, standing dead and cold in Repair Bay 7. The second shell landed closer. The overhead lights swung on their cables, and one of them burst, showering sparks across the oil-stained floor. Somewhere behind her, a technician screamed. The sound was high and reedy, barely human, and it cut through the alarm klaxons that had been wailing for the past 20 minutes like a knife through old cloth. Yuan Li did not scream. She pressed her cheek against the cold metal of the Centurion's shin armor and closed her eyes and counted to 3. Then she stood up, brushed the grit from her coveralls, and looked around the hangar bay with the practiced calm of someone who had once lived inside moments exactly like this one. Hangar Bay 3 was a cathedral of controlled chaos. 3 repair bays lined the eastern wall, each one a nest of scaffolding and diagnostic cables and half-disassembled machinery. The Centurion occupied Bay 7. Bay 8 held the stripped chassis of a commando that had been cannibalized for parts 6 months ago and never reassembled. Bay 9 was empty, its gantry arms spread wide like the ribs of some enormous metal skeleton. Along the western wall, tool racks and ammunition crates and coolant drums were stacked in the careful disarray that only technicians understood. And above everything, the vaulted ceiling rose 30 meters high, stained with decades of exhaust residue and rust. It smelled the way mech hangars always smelled. Reactor coolant, which carried a sharp chemical sweetness that burned the back of the throat. Lubricating oil, thick and mineral. The ozone tang of welding torches. And beneath all of it, the deep iron scent of BattleMech armor. 60 years of metal and war baked into the walls themselves. Yuan Li had spent 2 years learning to love that smell, or at least to tolerate it. 2 years since the Maskirovka had come for her, and everything had changed. A third explosion shook the hangar, and this time, she heard the distinctive double crack of a particle projector cannon firing at close range. The energy discharge lit up the narrow windows set high in the eastern wall, turning them from grimy rectangles into blazing white squares for half a second before fading. Someone was fighting out there. Someone was dying. "They've breached the northern perimeter," said a voice behind her, and she turned to find Senior Tech Dao Fangbo standing in the doorway to the parts bay, his face gray beneath the emergency lighting. He was a heavyset man in his 50s, with burn scars across both forearms, and a permanent squint from decades of staring at diagnostic readouts. He was also the closest thing Yuan Li had to a friend on this miserable garrison posting, which said more about the posting than it did about their friendship. 1st Battalion's forward lance engaged them at the ridgeline. "2 of our mechs are already down." "Which ones?" Yuan Li asked, and she hated how quickly the question came out. Hated the reflexive tactical calculation that still lived in the back of her brain like a tumor she could not excise. Peng's Vindicator took a headshot. He's gone. Lao's Wolverine lost a leg at the hip joint and went down in the ravine. No ejection signal. Feng Bo swallowed hard. Su Wei's Blackjack is still fighting, and Zhu has his commando running flanking maneuvers. But the Davion lance is heavy. They've got a marauder leading them. A marauder. Yuan Li felt the word land in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. The MAD 3R was 75 tons of concentrated battlefield authority. Twin particle projector cannons mounted in those distinctive arm pods. An autocannon 5 in the right torso, and a pair of medium lasers for close-in work. It ran hot. Everyone knew that. But a skilled pilot could manage the heat curve and turn those paired particle projector cannons into a wrecking crew that could gut a medium mech in 2 volleys. Against a damaged Blackjack and a light commando, the numbers were catastrophic. "What else are they fielding?" she asked. Feng Bo stared at her. "Since when do you ask tactical questions? Since shells started hitting our hangar." "What else?" He glanced at the datapad in his hand. Sensor returns show the Marauder, a Griffin, and a Hunchback. The Griffin has been lobbing long-range missile fire from the tree line while the Marauder and Hunchback push up the valley. The Hunchback is the 4 Golf variant. Yuan Li closed her eyes. The Hunchback HBK 4G 50 tons of medium BattleMech, built almost entirely around the Tamuzuru Type 20 autocannon mounted in its enormous right torso housing. That weapon was one of the most devastating short-range systems in the inner sphere, capable of tearing through armor plating like paper at close range. It was inelegant, unsubtle, and absolutely lethal. Paired with 2 medium lasers, it was a Street Fighter's mech, and whoever was piloting it had closed to within the perimeter, which meant they were confident. They had every reason to be. "Where's the base commander?" Yuan Li asked. "Zhongshao Van is in the command bunker. He's been calling for reinforcements for the past hour. Nobody's coming." Feng Bo's voice cracked on the last 2 words. "The HPG is down across half the Confederation. You know that. Everybody knows that." She did know that. The Federated Sun's invasion, what the Davion Command was already calling Operation Rat, had shattered the Capellan Confederation's communication network in the opening weeks. Entire worlds had fallen before they even knew they were under attack. This garrison, this insignificant supply depot on the border world of Hunan, was simply the next domino in a line that stretched all the way back to Xi'an. Another explosion outside. Closer now. The hangar lights flickered, and one of the heavy bay doors groaned on its track, the lower edge buckling inward where something massive had impacted the building next door. Yuan Li felt the floor vibrate beneath her boots and recognized the rhythm. Mech footfalls. Something big was walking past the hangar, each step a seismic event that she could track by the way the coolant drums rattled on their pallets. "Everyone out," Feng Bo said, turning to the other techs who had gathered behind him like frightened children. There were 6 of them, all junior, all wide-eyed. "Get to the shelters below the command bunker. Move." They moved. They scrambled and stumbled, and one of them, a girl no older than 19, was crying so hard she could barely see where she was going. Yuan Li watched them go and did not follow. Yuan Li, Funbo said. That means you too. I know. Then move. She did not move. She stood in the center of Hangar Bay 3, under the swinging lights and the rain of ceiling dust, and she looked at the Centurion in Repair Bay 7. It was not a beautiful machine. No Centurion ever was. Where other medium mechs carried a certain aesthetic logic, the Centurion had always struck her as something designed by committee during an argument. 50 tons of metal and myomer distributed across a humanoid frame that was broad in the shoulders and heavy in the arms, with a torso that hunched forward slightly, as if perpetually bracing against a headwind. The right arm was enormous, housing the Luxor D-Series autocannon 10 that served as the Centurion's primary weapon. And the arm itself was famously over-armored, designed to double as a shield in close combat. The left torso carried the Holly long-range missile 10-rack, and the center torso mounted a pair of Photech medium lasers, one facing forward and one guarding the rear. It was not fast. It was not graceful. But it was honest, in the way that functional things built to endure are honest. And right now, it was the only BattleMech within 100 meters that still had all 4 limbs attached. It was also, Yuan Li reminded herself, half repaired. She had been working on it for 3 weeks. The Centurion had come in with severe damage to its left torso armor, a seized actuator in the left knee, and a faulty targeting interlock on the autocannon. She had stripped the left torso, plating down to bare structure to assess the internal damage, and found cracked standard armor panels and a compromised missile feed mechanism. The left knee actuator was replaced, but not fully calibrated. The autocannon targeting interlock was fixed, but she had not had time to run a full fire control diagnostic. The medium lasers were functional. The long-range missile rack was physically intact, but the ammunition feed line was disconnected because she had been in the middle of replacing corroded feed clamps when the first shell hit the wall 20 minutes ago. The Neuro helmet sat on its cradle beside the cockpit access ladder, upside down, its interior padding worn smooth by years of use. It was a Confederation Standard Type 7, bulky and outdated, with a chin strap that had been repaired with electrical tape. Looking at it made her stomach turn. Yuan Li. Fengbo's voice was harder now. I'm not asking. I know you're not asking, she said quietly. I'm not listening. Don't do this. Do what? He crossed the distance between them in 4 quick strides and grabbed her arm. His grip was strong from years of hauling Myanmar bundles and mech-scale tools, and his fingers dug into the thin muscle of her bicep with an urgency that bordered on pain. I know who you were, he said. I've known since you got here. You think the Maskarovka erased your file. You think nobody talks. Former Sangwei Quan Yuan Li, 3rd Battalion, Ling's Lancers, 37 confirmed combat drops. Piloted a Vindicator for 9 years before they pulled you out of the cockpit and stuck you in coveralls. His eyes searched her face. I know what you're thinking, and I'm telling you. Don't. She looked at his hand on her arm. Then she looked at the Centurion. Fanbo, she said. How long do Su Wei and Ju have out there? Be honest. His jaw tightened. Minutes, maybe less. And after they fall? He did not answer because the answer was obvious. After they fell, the Davion Lance would walk into this base. Unopposed, they would level the command bunker. They would destroy the supply depot. They would kill or capture everyone who had not made it to a shelter. And then they would move on to the next target. And Hunan would be another green pin on some Davion general's campaign map. There are 93 people on this base, Yuan Li said. I counted them last week because Zhong Xiaovan wanted an updated roster for the quartermaster. 93. 41 of them are non-combatant support staff. Cooks, clerks, a doctor, and 2 medics. 9 of them are dependents, Fengbo. Children. You're not a MechWarrior anymore, he said, but his grip on her arm was loosening. No, she agreed. I'm not. She pulled her arm free and walked to the cockpit access ladder. Her boots rang on the metal rungs as she climbed. The sound was hollow and familiar, and it reached into her chest and pulled at something she had spent 2 years trying to bury. 9 years in a cockpit, 9 years of neural interface and reactor heat and the constant low hum of a fusion engine that became so familiar it replaced your own heartbeat. 9 years of being Sang Wei Quan, 3rd Battalion's steady hand, the pilot they put on the difficult drops because she never panicked and she never missed. She had fought in border skirmishes and garrison actions, and once, on a frozen hellscape called Palos, she had held a ridgeline for 6 hours against a reinforced Davion Lance while the evacuation transports loaded behind her. Her Vindicator had lost its left arm and half its center torso armor, and she had kept fighting, rotating between the PPC and the medium laser, managing heat, managing damage, managing fear. And then Colonel Sung had defected. Sung Wei Han, commanding officer of Ling's Lancers, hero of the Confederation, had taken his Thunderbolt and walked it across the border into Davion space on a Tuesday afternoon in September. And the Maskirovka had descended on everyone he had ever commanded, like ravens on a carcass. It did not matter that Yuan Li had not known. It did not matter that she had been on medical leave, recovering from a knee injury, when Sung made his move. Guilt by association was the Maskirovka's favorite tool, and Chancellor Liao's paranoia had metastasized into something that consumed loyal soldiers as readily as traitors. They came for her at 0300 on a cold morning. 2 agents and 4 infantrymen. They let her dress. They let her take 1 personal item. She chose a holograph of her mother, who had died the year before, and who had always said that pride was a luxury only the powerful could afford. They did not let her say goodbye to her mech. She found out later that the Vindicator had been reassigned to a warrior house MechWarrior who had never seen real combat. She tried not to think about whether that pilot was still alive. She tried not to think about the cockpit she had customized over 9 years, the notches she had scratched into the left armrest, 1 for each engagement. She tried not to think about the particular sound her Vindicator's PPC made when it fired, a rising whine followed by a crack that she could feel in her molars. She tried not to think about any of it, and she failed every single day. The cockpit of the Centurion was cramped and utilitarian. It smelled of old sweat and reactor coolant, and something metallic that might have been corroded wiring. The command couch was patched with duct tape in 3 places, and the restraint harness had a frayed left shoulder strap. The main display was dark, the secondary screens blank. The entire instrument panel a dead constellation of switches and indicators and warning lights. A cooling vest hung from a hook on the right wall, its hoses coiled like sleeping serpents. Above the main display, a small figurine had been glued to the instrument panel, a jade cat with one ear broken off. It had belonged to the Centurion's previous pilot, Sang-Wei Chen, who had been killed 4 months ago when an ammunition explosion tore through his mech's left torso during a training exercise. That was how the Centurion had ended up in Repair Bay 7. Yuan Li sat in the command couch. The cushion compressed beneath her weight and conformed to her body in a way that felt like a handshake from an old friend. She stared at the dark displays, and the dead switches, and the jade cat with its broken ear, and she felt the tremor start in her hands. It began in her fingers, a fine vibration, almost electric, that traveled up through her wrists and into her forearms. She had felt it before, years ago, on her very first combat drop, when the Leopard-class dropship had hit atmosphere and the turbulence had rattled her teeth, and she had looked at the other MechWarriors in their restraints and realized that she was the only one shaking. Sang-Shao Park had noticed. He had leaned across the aisle and put his hand on her knee and said, in a voice as calm as still water, "The shaking is not fear. The shaking is your body preparing itself. Let it happen. Then let it go." She let it happen. She gripped the armrests of the command couch and watched her hands tremble and did not try to stop them. Outside, another explosion shook the hangar, and through the narrow cockpit view screen, she could see the far wall crack from floor to ceiling, a jagged, black line that widened with each impact. She reached for the cooling vest. It was 2 sizes too large. Chen had been a big man, broad in the chest and thick in the arms, and the vest hung on Yuan Li like a poncho. She cinched the adjustment straps as tight as they would go and connected the coolant hoses to the cockpit's circulation ports. The hoses were cold in her hands. She could feel the residual coolant in them, a faint slickness that seeped through the valve seals and left her palms damp. Then she reached for the neuro helmet. It was heavier than she remembered. The Type 7 weighed merely 4 kilograms, and when she lifted it from the cradle, the weight settled into her arms like an accusation. She turned it over and looked at the interior. The neural contact pads were worn but intact, arranged in their standard configuration around the crown and temples. The chin strap, with its electrical tape repair, dangled loosely. A faint smell rose from the padding, the ghost of sweat and fear and concentration from every pilot who had ever worn it. She held it in her lap for a long moment. Her hands had stopped trembling. 2 years. 2 years since she had worn a neuro helmet. 2 years since she had felt the neural interface engage, that strange and intimate sensation of her brain reaching out and touching something vast and mechanical and alive. 2 years since she had been a MechWarrior. The Maskirovka had taken her rank. They had taken her mech. They had taken her name from the rolls of Ling's Lancers and replaced it with a designation, Tech Third Grade, a number instead of a person. They had moved her to this backwater garrison and given her a wrench and told her to make herself useful. And she had done it, because pride was a luxury and survival was not. But they had not taken the thing that made her a MechWarrior. They could not. It was not in the rank or the machine. It was in the neural pathways that had been shaped by 9 years of interface. In the muscle memory that lived in her hands and her spine. In the part of her brain that still dreamed in mech scale movement. That part of her was not dead. It had only been sleeping. She put on the neural helmet. The contact pads settled against her temples like cold fingertips. She tightened the chin strap, felt the familiar pressure across her jaw. The weight of the helmet compressed her neck and shoulders. And for a moment she was 23 again, sitting in the cockpit of a training mech on New Certus, terrified and exhilarated, feeling the neural interface for the first time and understanding with absolute clarity that this was what she had been born to do. She reached for the reactor ignition sequence. The master power switch was a heavy red toggle on the left side of the main console. She flipped it, and the cockpit lights came on, dim and amber, emergency power only, fed by the backup batteries. The main display flickered, showed static, then resolved into a boot sequence. Green text scrolled across the screen. System checks running in cascade. Reactor. Status. Standby. Gyroscope. Offline. Weapons. Safe end. Neuro helmet. Seeking signal. She felt it then. The helmet's contact pads warmed against her skin as the neural interface searched for her brainwave pattern. It was not calibrated to her. It was still calibrated to Chen, who was dead. And the system would need to adapt. She closed her eyes and focused on the pattern she had been trained to project. The specific neural signature that told the interface, I am the pilot. I am in control. The helmet hummed. The contact pads pulsed. And then, like a lock finding its key, the interface engaged. It was like waking up. Not the slow, groggy emergence from ordinary sleep, but the sudden, violent return to consciousness after a long and dreamless coma. One moment, she was Quan Yuan Li, Tech Third Grade, a small woman in an oversized cooling vest, sitting in a dead cockpit. The next moment, she was something else, something larger, something that extended beyond the boundaries of her skin and filled the metal shell around her, reaching down through the command couch and into the bones of the Centurion itself. She could feel the mech, not in any mystical sense, not in the way the old stories talked about mech warriors bonding with their machines, but in the practical, neurological sense that the interface was designed to create. The gyroscope was still offline, but she could feel its absence, a hollowness in her inner ear that told her the mech was not balanced. She could feel the weight of the autocannon in the right arm, a phantom heaviness in her right shoulder. She could feel the damage to the left torso, an ache like a bruised rib, where the armor was stripped and the structure was exposed. The boot Sequence completed. The main display showed the Centurion's status in stark green text against a black background. Reactor, ignition. Ready. She pressed the ignition sequence. The Nissan 200 fusion reactor came to life in the belly of the Centurion, with a sound that started below the range of human hearing and climbed. She felt it first as a vibration in the command couch, a deep thrumming that traveled up through her spine and into her skull. Then the sound arrived, a rising hum that filled the cockpit and pressed against her eardrums, and the temperature began to climb. The cooling vest kicked in, circulating chilled fluid across her chest and back, and the cockpit environmental system engaged with a wheeze of recycled air. The displays lit up, all of them. The main screen showed the forward view through the cockpit armor glass, overlaid with the heads-up display, range finders, target acquisition brackets, damage schematic, heat gauge, ammunition counters. The secondary screen showed rear arc sensors, communication channels, and the tactical map, which was a confused mess of red and blue icons moving across terrain contours. The gyroscope spun up, and the hollowness in her inner ear vanished, replaced by a sense of balance so profound it brought tears to her eyes. The Centurion shifted on its feet, settling its weight, and she felt it as clearly as she felt her own body settling into a chair. 50 tons of metal and myomer and weapon systems. And it moved because she told it to move, because the neuro interface read the intention in her brain before she even formed it as a conscious thought. 2 years. 2 years she had been asleep, and now she was awake, and the world was burning outside, and there was no time for tears. She ran through the combat checklist with a speed that surprised her. Autocannon 10, functional, targeting interlock repaired, ammunition loaded, 1 ton in the magazine, 10 rounds. She would have to make each one count. Medium lasers, forward and rear, functional, capacitors charged, long-range missiles. The rack was intact, but the ammunition feed was disconnected. She would not have missiles. That hurt. The LRM-10 was the Centurion's primary long-range system, and without it, she would have to close to medium laser range to supplement the autocannon, which meant getting inside the engagement envelope of that hunchback's autocannon 20. Left torso armor was gone, bare structure on the left side, internal components exposed. One solid hit there, and she would lose the missile rack entirely, maybe the engine shielding. The left knee actuator was replaced but uncalibrated, which meant the left leg would respond a fraction of a second slower than the right. At a walk, manageable. At a run, dangerous. In combat, potentially fatal. She checked the communication channels and found them full of static and screaming. She filtered through the noise and found the tactical frequency. This is Firebase Hunan. Any surviving units, report status. The voice was Zhong Shao Van's, and it was no longer the clipped, authoritative bark she had heard at morning briefings. It was the voice of a man watching his command die in real time. Firebase. This is Blackjack 2-1. Su Wei's voice was ragged, punctuated by the staccato crash of weapons fire. I'm combat effective, but I've lost both arms and my autocannons are gone. I've got my 2 torso lasers and a quarter armor remaining. The marauder is pushing my position. I need support, or I need to withdraw. Acknowledge. Blackjack 2-1. We have no available reinforcements. Hold your position. A pause. Then Su Wei's voice. Quieter now. Understood, Firebase. Holding. Either his radio was dead, or he was. Yuan Li keyed the tactical frequency. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Filtered through the neurohelmet's microphone. Amplified and transmitted across a channel she had no authorization to use. Firebase Hunan. This is Centurion 7. Bay 3. I am powered up and combat capable. Requesting permission to engage. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. It felt like 4 hours. Centurion 7. This is Firebase. Who is this? That mech is not assigned a pilot. Identify yourself. She drew a breath. This is Tech 3rd Grade Quan Yun Li, former Songwei 3rd Battalion, Ling's Lancers. I am requesting permission to engage. Another silence. Longer this time. She could hear Vaughn breathing on the channel. Could hear the muffled crump of explosions in the background of his transmission. Quan! His voice was flat. You are not authorized to pilot a BattleMech. You were stripped of warrior certification by order of the Maskirovka. If you take that machine into combat, I cannot protect you from the consequences. Zhong Shao, she said, with respect. If I do not take this machine into combat, there will be no one left to face consequences. Another pause. Outside, through the cockpit view screen, she could see the hangar bay doors closed and locked, massive slabs of reinforced metal that were never designed to withstand BattleMech weapons fire. Beyond them, the sounds of battle were growing louder. Closer. Centurion 7. Vaughn's voice had changed. Something in it had broken. Or perhaps something had been released. You are authorized to engage at your discretion. Try to buy us time. Firebase out. Yuan Li closed her eyes for 1 more second. Then she opened them and walked the Centurion forward. The mech's first step was clumsy. The uncalibrated left knee actuator lagged, and the Centurion lurched slightly, a stumble that would have been invisible to an observer, but that she felt through the neurohelmet like a missed heartbeat. She compensated instinctively, shifting weight to the right leg, adjusting her neural output to account for the delay. The second step was smoother. The third was almost natural. She crossed the hangar floor in 4 strides, each footfall cracking the ferrocrete and sending up plumes of dust. The tool racks and coolant drums scattered before her like toys. She reached the main bay doors and did not stop. The Centurion's right arm came up, the massive autocannon barrel leading, and she punched through the doors with the mech's left shoulder. The metal shrieked and tore and folded outward. And then she was through, stepping into the pale afternoon light of Hunan's winter sky. The world outside was on fire. The base's northern perimeter was a cratered wasteland. The defensive berms had been blasted apart, leaving raw earth and twisted reinforcement bars. 2 guard towers were burning, their structures bent at impossible angles. A column of black smoke rose from the vehicle depot to the east, where a fuel storage tank had detonated and turned the surrounding buildings into charcoal. And beyond the perimeter, moving through the tree line that bordered the valley approach, she could see them. 3 BattleMechs. The 4th, she realized, must be circling around from the west. The Marauder was unmistakable. 75 tons of heavy fire support. Its distinctive wide-set arm pods, giving it a silhouette that looked like nothing else on the battlefield. It was advancing through the shattered tree line with the patient, deliberate stride of a predator that knows its prey is wounded. Its right arm pod tracked back and forth, the twin barrels of the PPC and medium laser sweeping for targets. To the Marauder's left, the Griffin moved with quick, confident steps, its jump jets flaring occasionally as it hopped from cover to cover, using the terrain to mask its approach while lobbing long-range missile volleys from its right torso rack. The 55-ton mech carried a PPC in its right arm as well, and between the 2 fire support mechs, the base was being systematically dismantled. And there, moving up the center of the valley with the swagger of a brawler closing distance, was the hunchback. The massive right torso housing of the autocannon 20 dominated its profile, an absurd, brutal growth that gave the mech its name and its reputation. The pilot was pushing hard, running at full speed across the open ground, trusting the heavier mechs behind to keep the defenders suppressed, while the hunchback closed to its devastating short range. Yuan Li had perhaps 90 seconds before the hunchback was inside optimum range for that autocannon 20. After that, one clean hit to her exposed left torso would end the fight. She found Su Wei's blackjack crouched behind the remains of a supply warehouse, its right arm a sparking stump, its armor scarred and pitted. It was firing its remaining medium lasers at the Griffin, green beams stabbing out across the valley. But at this range, the shots were doing little more than scorching paint. Su Wei was fighting like a person who had decided that dying well was the best remaining option. Blackjack 2-1. This is Centurion 7. I'm coming out of Bay 3. I'm on your left flank. Centurion 7? Su Wei's voice cracked with disbelief. Who the hell is this? Your reinforcements. Focus your fire on the Griffin. Keep it at range. I'm going to deal with the hunchback. Su Wei let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. In a half-repaired Centurion. Against a 4 golf. Are you insane? Probably. Keep the Griffin busy. She did not wait for his response. She pushed the Centurion into a run, and the mech responded with a ground-eating stride that shook the earth beneath its feet. 43.2 kilometers per hour at a walk. 64.8 at a full run. The Centurion was not fast by medium mech standards, but it covered ground with a relentless mechanical rhythm that ate distance with every step. The hunchback's pilot saw her immediately. The mech's torso swiveled, bringing the massive autocannon housing to bear, and Yuan Li felt a cold spike of adrenaline lance through her chest. The autocannon 20's effective range was short, but she was closing that distance fast. She had seconds, not minutes. She fired the autocannon 10. The Luxor D-series roared, the right arm kicking with recoil, and a stream of shells crossed the 400 meters between them and struck the hunchback in the left arm. Armor shattered and fell away in jagged plates, exposing the gray myanmar beneath. The hunchback staggered but did not fall, and its pilot corrected course and kept coming. 9 rounds remaining. The Griffin noticed her. A flight of long-range missiles arced over the tree line and came spiraling down toward her position. And she broke left, pushing the Centurion into an evasive zigzag that tested the uncalibrated left knee with every change of direction. Most of the missiles missed. 2 struck her right leg, blasting craters in the armor but not penetrating. The heat gauge climbed a tick. She fired the forward medium laser. A single green beam lanced out and scored across the hunchback's center torso, melting armor and glowing furrows. The hunchback fired back, its own medium lasers reaching for her. But at this range, the shots went wide, one passing over her right shoulder, close enough to register on the thermal sensors. Then the hunchback stopped running and planted its feet, and Yuan Li knew what was coming. The autocannon 20 needed a stable platform for accurate fire, and the hunchback's pilot was giving it one. She threw the Centurion sideways. The left knee screamed in protest, the uncalibrated actuator seizing for a fraction of a second, and the mech stumbled, dropping its left shoulder. The autocannon 20 fired. The sound was not a roar, but a single, tremendous crack, like a thunderbolt given physical form. And the stream of heavy shells passed through the space where her center torso had been half a second earlier and detonated against the ground behind her, throwing up a geyser of earth and rock. The miss saved her life. The stumble saved her life. The faulty actuator that she had not had time to calibrate saved her life. She filed that under battlefield irony and kept moving. She closed to 200 meters and fired the autocannon again. This time she aimed for the hunchback's right torso, for the housing that held that terrible weapon. The shell struck true, punching through the forward armor and detonating inside the housing. The hunchback rocked backward, and she saw pieces of the autocannon 20's barrel assembly fly away into the dust. The weapon was not destroyed. She could see the barrel was still mostly intact, but the housing armor was compromised. One more good hit, and the ammunition magazine inside might cook off. 8 rounds. The hunchback's pilot made a decision. Instead of withdrawing, instead of using the remaining armor to shield the damaged torso, the pilot charged. 50 tons of BattleMech came barreling toward her at full speed, closing the distance with desperate, reckless aggression. The medium lasers fired continuously, and this time at close range they found their marks. One beam cutting across her right arm, and the other slashing her center torso. Yuan Li did something she had not done in 2 years. She breathed out, let her shoulders drop, and fell into the combat state that Sangshan Park had taught her on her very first deployment. The world narrowed, the noise faded, the fear dissolved. There was only the mech and the target and the space between them. She sidestepped right, using the Centurion's heavily armored right arm as a shield, and brought the autocannon to bear on the hunchback's left torso. the lightly armored location housing its massive ammunition bins. At 100 meters, point-blank range, she fired. The autocannon 10-round hit the left torso armor and punched through. The ammunition magazine for the autocannon 20 detonated. The explosion tore the hunchback apart from the inside. The left torso blew outward, the cascading detonation ripping through the center chassis and sending the mech spinning sideways. The pilot ejected a fraction of a second before the fireball consumed the cockpit space. The ejection seat rocketing upward on a column of white flame, and the hunchback collapsed in a heap of burning metal. 7 rounds. Yuan Li did not pause to appreciate the kill. The marauder was turning toward her now, both arm pods swinging to track, and she could see the particle projector cannons charging, a faint blue glow building around the barrel tips. Blackjack 2-1. Status. Still here, Su Wei gasped. Griffin pulled back to the tree line. I hit it twice, but I don't have the firepower to push it. Keep it pinned. I've got the marauder. You've got the marauder, Su Wei repeated. And this time he did not laugh. He did not say anything for a moment. And when he spoke again, his voice was different, steadier, as if watching someone else be insane had given him permission to be brave. Understood, Centurion 7. I'll keep the Griffin honest. The marauder fired. Twin particle projector cannon beams crossed the distance between them in an instant, blazing blue-white lances of artificial lightning that turned the air to plasma along their path. One struck the ground at her feet, blasting a crater and sending a shockwave up through the Centurion's legs. The other hit her right arm. The impact was staggering. The Centurion's right arm jerked backward, and the neural feedback through the interface hit her like a punch to the shoulder. Armor vaporized, running in molten streams down the arm housing. But the arm held. The famous Centurion shield arm held. The armor there was thick by design, layered and reinforced, and the PPC blast had chewed through the outer layers, but had not reached the autocannon mechanism beneath. She ran. Not toward the marauder. Because closing with a 75-ton heavy mech in a damaged 50-ton medium was suicide, but laterally, cutting across the marauder's firing arc, forcing the pilot to track a moving target, while she looked for an advantage. The marauder's medium lasers fired, probing shots at maximum range. One missed entirely. The other grazed her left leg, doing superficial damage. She responded with her forward medium laser, the beam striking the marauder's left arm pod and raising a shower of sparks, but doing little meaningful damage to the heavy mech's thick armor. The autocannon 5 mounted in the marauder's right torso barked, and shells stitched across the ground in front of her. A probing burst that she sidestepped with a neural twitch. The marauder pilot was good, patient, managing heat between the twin PPCs, cycling them alternately, rather than firing both together, using the autocannon and lasers to fill the gaps. It was textbook marauder tactics, and against a fully operational opponent it would have been a methodical, professional kill. But Yen Li had spent 9 years fighting Davion pilots, and she knew their textbooks as well as they did. The marauder's weakness was heat. It always had been. The twin PPCs generated enormous thermal loads, and even with the mech's heat sink capacity, Sustained fire would push the reactor toward emergency shutdown. A disciplined pilot could manage it, but managing heat meant managing fire rate, which meant predictable gaps between volleys. She counted. The right PPC fired. She dodged. 2 seconds. The left PPC fired. She dodged. 4 seconds while both cycled. The autocannon filled the gap. The medium lasers probed. She learned the rhythm. Right PPC, 2 seconds. Left PPC, 4-second gap. Right PPC, 2 seconds. Left PPC, 4-second gap. On the third cycle, during the 4-second gap, she stopped running and pivoted to face the marauder head-on. She planted the Centurion's feet and raised the right arm and fired the autocannon 10 into the marauder's center torso. The shells hit like a battering ram. At this range, 300 meters, the autocannon 10 was near its optimal accuracy, and the full burst struck in a tight pattern across the marauder's center line. Armor cracked and cratered, and the heavy mech actually rocked backward half a step. 6 rounds. She fired the forward medium laser in the same breath. The beam hit the same damaged area, and she saw armor slow away in molten sheets, exposing the dark underlayer of internal structure. The marauder's pilot abandoned the textbook. Both PPCs fired together, and the world turned blue-white. The right beam hit her center torso. The left beam hit her left side. The center torso armor held. Barely. She felt the heat spike through the cockpit, the cooling vest straining to compensate, sweat breaking out across her back and chest. But the left side where the armor had been stripped for repairs, where bare structure was exposed, where the long-range missile rack sat disconnected and vulnerable. The PPC beam cut through the exposed internal structure like a welding torch through tin. She felt the Centurion shudder, a deep, structural groan that vibrated through the command couch and into her bones. The damage schematic on her secondary screen lit up in red. Left torso, critical damage. LRM-10 rack destroyed. Heatsink compromised. Internal structure at 20%. The heat in the cockpit climbed. The cooling vest's circulation pumped faster, but the coolant felt warm now. Too warm, failing to keep up with the thermal load. Sweat ran down her face and pooled in the chin strap of the neuro helmet, but the marauder had fired both PPCs together, and that meant its heat was spiking. Hard. She could see it on her sensors, the infrared signature of the heavy mech blazing white-hot, heat radiating from every surface. The pilot would have to pause now, let the heat sinks work, or risk an automatic shutdown. She had 4 seconds, maybe 5. She ran straight at the marauder. The heavy mech stood frozen in its own heat, radiator panels glowing, the pilot struggling to cycle the reactor down from the red line. Its autocannon fired, a desperate snapshot that went wide. Its medium lasers pulsed, and one of them scored across her right shoulder, but she did not slow down. At 150 meters, she fired the autocannon. The shells hit the marauder's already damaged center torso and punched through the remaining armor into the internal structure. She saw sparks erupt from the wound, saw something inside the mech's chest catch fire. 5 rounds. At 100 meters, she fired the forward medium laser. The beam drilled into the same hole, and the fire inside the marauder's chest grew brighter. The marauder staggered. Its right arm pod drooped, the PPC barrel dipping toward the ground. Something inside the mech had broken, a gyroscope malfunction, or a structural failure, and the 75-ton machine swayed like a drunk. Then the pilot ejected, the cockpit canopy blew outward, and the ejection seat punched upward on its rocket, carrying the Davion MechWarrior into the gray sky. The marauder stood for a moment longer, swaying, burning, and then toppled forward and hit the ground with an impact that Yuan Li felt through the Centurion's feet. She stood over the fallen marauder and breathed. The cockpit was sweltering. Her cooling vest had given up any pretense of keeping her comfortable and was now merely keeping her alive. The damaged schematic showed red across half the Centurion's frame. The left torso was a ruin. The center torso armor was thin enough to read a newspaper through. The right arm was battered, but functional. The autocannon had 5 rounds remaining. On the tactical display, the Griffin's icon was retreating. Su Wei's blackjack had pushed it hard enough that the loss of the marauder and the hunchback had broken its pilot's nerve. The blue icon moved north through the tree line, accelerating jump jets flaring in short hops that carried it away from the base and back toward whatever dropship had brought it here. Firebase Hunan, this is Centurion 7. Her voice was hoarse. The heat had dried her throat raw. Marauder is down. Hunchback is down. Griffin is withdrawing north. I do not have visual on the 4th contact. Requesting sensor sweep of the western approach. A long pause. Then Vaughn's voice, stripped of authority, stripped of protocol, carrying nothing but naked astonishment. Centurion 7. The 4th contact is confirmed destroyed. Drew's commando rammed it in the western ravine before we lost his signal. The commando's ammunition magazine detonated on impact. Both mechs are gone. A breath. The sector is clear. All hostile contacts are neutralized or withdrawing. Yuan Li closed her eyes. Zhu, the young pilot with a quick grin and a commando that he polished every weekend, even though everyone told him it was a waste of time. He had rammed his mech into the enemy. He had given everything. She stood, the Centurion, in the middle of the ruined base, surrounded by smoke and fire and the wreckage of machines, and she did not move for a long time. The reactor hummed beneath her. The neural helmet pressed against her temples. The cooling vest circulated its too warm coolant across her skin, and she could feel every wound the Centurion had taken as clearly as if the burns and the breaks were in her own body. On the communication channel, voices were emerging from the static. Base personnel calling in from the shelters. Medical teams requesting clearance to move. Damage control parties organizing. The machinery of survival grinding back to life. Centurion 7. Vaughn again. Quan, bring it home. She walked the Centurion back toward the hangar. The left knee actuator seized twice on the return trip, and each time she paused, shifted weight, and coaxed the mech forward with the patience of someone who understood that broken things could still move if you treated them gently. The bay doors she had smashed through were hanging in twisted sheets. and she had to duck the Centurion's head to fit through the gap she had made. She brought the mech to a stop in Repair Bay 7, exactly where it had been standing 20 minutes ago. The gantry arms were bent and the scaffolding had collapsed, but the bay itself was intact. She planted the Centurion's feet on the cracked ferrocrete and let the mech settle, and then she began the shutdown sequence. The weapons safed. The targeting systems went dark. The secondary displays blinked off one by one, and the heads-up display faded from the main screen, like a dream dissolving in morning light. The gyroscope spun down, and the sense of balance faded, and she was just a woman in a chair again, small and tired and hurting. The fusion reactor shut down last. The hum that had filled her bones for the past 20 minutes descended through the register, dropping from a sound into a vibration, into a feeling, into nothing. The silence that replaced it was enormous. It filled the cockpit like water filling a vessel, and in that silence she heard her own heartbeat, fast and strong and stubbornly, defiantly alive. She removed the neuro helmet and set it carefully on the cradle. Her hair was plastered to her skull with sweat. The contact pads had left red marks on her temples that would take hours to fade. She unhooked the cooling vest hoses and shrugged off the vest and hung it back on its hook. She sat in the dead cockpit for another minute, looking at the jade cat with its broken ear. Then she unstrapped the restraint harness and climbed down the access ladder on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Feng Bo was waiting at the bottom. He looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. There was fear in it, and relief, and something else. Something that might have been recognition. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The left torso is gone, Yuan Li said. The armor needs to be completely replaced. The missile rack is scrap. The engine shielding took PPC damage and will need to be inspected for radiation leakage. The center torso armor is compromised and should be stripped and redone. She paused. The autocannon is fine. Both medium lasers are fine. The right arm held up well. Feng Bo stared at her. You're giving me a damage report. I'm a technician, she said. It's my job. He continued to stare. Behind him, she could see people emerging from the shelter entrance, blinking in the hangar lights, looking around at the dust and the debris and the mech standing in its bay, with scorch marks across its frame and its left side torn open like a wound. Yuan Li, Feng Bo said, and his voice was very quiet. You know what happens now, when the Maskirovka finds out what you did, when the reports go up the chain. She knew. She had known when she climbed the ladder. She had known when she put on the neuro helmet. She had known when she keyed the reactor ignition and felt the fusion engine wake up in the Centurion's belly like a second heart. The Maskirovka did not forgive, and they did not forget. And a dispossessed tech who strapped into a BattleMech without authorization was either a hero or a criminal. And in the Capellan Confederation, the difference between those two things depended entirely on which way the Chancellor's paranoia was blowing on any given day. I know, she said. You could run. Take the mech and go. The Centurion could make it to the border if you pushed hard. The Federated Suns takes defectors. They'd give you a new mech, a new name, a commission. She looked at him. She looked at the people behind him. The 19-year-old tech, who had been crying, was standing in the shelter doorway, her face still wet, staring at Yuan Li with an expression of such fierce, desperate gratitude that it made something crack in Yuan Li's chest. "I'm not a defector," she said. "I never was. That was the whole point." She picked up the torque wrench she had dropped when the first shell hit the wall. It was still lying on the floor where she had left it, next to the Centurion's right foot, covered in dust but otherwise undamaged. She hefted it in her hand, felt the familiar weight of it. The tool she had learned to use when they took away the weapon she had been born to hold. Then she walked to the Centurion's left torso, looked up at the damage, and began calculating what it would take to fix it. Behind her, the base continued its slow process of putting itself back together. Medics carried stretchers. Damage control teams fought fires. Communications officers tried to raise anyone on any frequency who might send help. And in the sky to the north, the smoke from the burning marauder rose in a column that leaned eastward with the wind, darkening the winter sun. Feng Bo watched her work for a long time. Then, he picked up his own tools and joined her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that the silence did not say better. The Centurion stood above them, battered and broken, and still standing, and in the dim light of the damaged hangar, Quan Yuan Li put her hands on its wounds and began, once again, the patient and necessary work of repair.